Genesis 25 this morning. I know. Hold back the cheers and the jubilation. I sat down and I read an entire commentary on the book of Exodus this week, which actually was more fascinating than you would think. But it's fascinating because as you study out the topic, and we're going to cover this a little bit in the morning service, God enjoys distinctions. And so as you go through specifically the book of Exodus, there's going to be a distinction between God and man. And so there's going to be a very, very pronounced distinction that God is saying, I'm going to put a separation between God and man. He says, I'm also going to put a separation between men and women. All right? Now again, that's not popular in our culture, but that's what God's saying. He's saying, I have set it up. You're both equal in my sight. There's nothing special about a man that's special. But there is a difference, and you have a different job to do. You have a different priority in certain areas. And that's why he'll say things like, basically, women, you are to keep the house, which means you're kind of the boss of the house. You know, you're kind of king of that little, so you do that thing, and then, hey, husbands, you're in charge of these. It's fascinating to look. And what I cannot get over after reading that whole commentary is God will repeatedly bring women to the forefront. He so repeatedly does, where instead of just saying, honor your father or honor your parents, he will say, honor your father and your mother. And he'll repeatedly do that in order to draw attention and say, both of these parents matter. And that was so countercultural for the day because he's trying to stress both of these parents deserve to be respected. And it's just so weird because looking at the culture of the day where it was basically the dad was the boss and who cares about the women? God kept elevating women to these really high levels, but he still said there's a role to play. So, husbands, you're in charge. Women, wives, you're to submit to your own husband, not to someone else's husband. You submit, and it's this family structure that he sets up. And so he's saying there's a distinction between men and women, but they both have their value. And so just making a distinction doesn't suddenly set you on a different tier. Now, in the case of God and man, it does, and in the next one we'll talk about. But then he also says there's a difference between mankind and animals. And then final distinction is between life and death. And so you'll notice that there's certain metaphors, there's certain pictures, there's certain things that represent death. And the priest who represented life was not allowed to touch certain things because it represented death. And you got to remember that the Israelites, and we'll see it here at the end of Genesis, the Israelites are coming out of Egypt. Egypt quite literally worshipped death. One of their holy books is the Book of the Dead, and you're like, I wonder what that's all about. It was very, very focused on death. The pyramids were tombs. It was just, yeah. And Egypt didn't quite put a lot of distinctions between man and beast. Just look at their gods. Their gods are quite literally humans with animal heads because they're this weird hybrid thing. And so what God is doing is God is setting up, I see a difference between me and humanity. I see a difference between men and women. I see a difference between mankind and animal kind. And there is a stark difference between life and death. And so a lot of those weird laws that you see when we get to the book of Exodus, it basically is setting up a difference to say, you are different than your surroundings. What's also fascinating, take this as you will, God is going to set up the death penalty for all sorts of stuff. The death penalty he's you do this and it's death penalty. You do that and it's a death penalty. But you never actually hear about anyone actually being put to death for any of it. And in fact, there's one place where you do see the death penalty used, and it's the man who's picking up sticks on the Sabbath. And that's one thing, and we'll talk about that. But what is God doing? God is basically saying, I take this so seriously, but you don't see him actually use it too often. Okay? Now let's walk our way through this. And in Genesis 25, we're kind of seeing the lead up to some things that God is setting up. Genesis 25. And again, to recap where we are, who is God writing the book of Genesis to? What group of people? The Israelites. Okay? The Israelites have just come out of Egypt. They have just come out of a religion that's full of death, okay? And God is telling them, this is where you came from. This is your culture, if you will. So think about us. Like we here in the United States, we've been a country for, since the 1700s, so about 250 years or so. Imagine moving out of the United States and having to change your culture. Some of you quite literally have done this as you move to the United States. But imagine spending hundreds of years, and now you come and you have to form an entirely new culture. That is what's going on. All right? And so here we are in Genesis 25, and he's trying to build a whole new culture, and he's reminding them of where they came from. Now again, they're in the middle of learning all this. They're in the middle of learning the difference between all these things. And look at what happens. It says, all right, your father was Abraham, and he was a man who lived by faith. And it says, now Abraham, he took a wife, okay, and so this is after Sarah had died, and her name was Keturah. And she bare him Zimram, and Jokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Ishbak, and Shua, a lot of kids. Okay, summarize it to this. Remember that whole big deal we had about Abraham having a son? Okay, he had him. And now he's got a whole bunch of others, all right? Now, I want you to see that because what this is doing is he's saying, God had like the one son that was waiting for. That was the son that he's like, this is the son of promise. This is the son that's going to be super important. And then it's like the dam breaks open, and now he's saying, remember I said I would give you descendants as the sand of the seashore. And I'm going to give you a land, and I'm going to give you a promise, and I'm going to put my name in you. And that's what you see going on. And he's starting to say, I'm going to make you so different than the area that you're around. All right? And he's got all these kids, and Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac. Okay? This is going to be really important, because what you're about to see is the start of something where it's the birthright and the blessing. And that's what you're going to see here in the next few chapters that's going to be really important. You got the birthright. Okay? And typically, it's going to go to the firstborn. But then you're also going to see a blessing. And what it's going to do is these are going to be both financial, but there's also going to be a spiritual aspect to it. And I'm going to bring up why this is important. But he's giving all of this responsibility and all of this privilege to Isaac and saying, it's your job to divvy it out. Okay? So that's this idea. The patriarch is not handed all the wealth just to say, you're now king of the castle, you're lord of all your brothers. It's more or less saying, you're now responsible for everyone else in the family. Because now they have to come to you to get all the supplies that they need. They need to come to you for that spiritual leadership. So I want you to understand that, because what we're about to see is we're about to see Enoch, who should be the one to inherit all that. And he goes, I don't want that responsibility. I don't want that. And he's going to just kind of casually throw it aside. And it shows his character, because he can casually throw aside all the spiritual responsibility because he's like, I don't want it. Now, he theoretically would have really, really wanted the financial blessings. He would have wanted the financial stuff that came along with it. But in throwing away one and kind of casually treating the other with disdain, he threw away both at the same time. And we'll see that play out. Now, as you keep going, it says, Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac, and the son of the concubines that Abraham had. Abraham gave gifts, and he sent them away from Isaac his son while he yet lived, eastward into the east country. These are the days of Abraham, his life which he had lived 115 years. Abraham gave up the ghost, died in an old age as an old man, full of years, and he was gathered to his people. I want to pause. I know we're covering a few minutia details here that you're like, okay, why are you covering this? Look what it says here. He was gathered to his people. What do you think that means? Okay, yeah, he goes to the dead. He goes to where his people are after death. You're going to see some language as you get into Exodus where it talks about you're being cut off. And some of that cut off language literally means like dead, like you just died. But some of it implies you're exiled and you don't get to be with your people anymore. So it's a serious, certain serious crimes that basically say you're not going to value the things your people value. You don't get to be where your people are. And that's something where Abraham here, he says, hey, I'm gathered to my people. And he's full of years. Now, as you keep going, it says, and his son Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah. We talked about this months ago, but this is where Sarai was buried. This is the area that they bought. Now, look what it says. In the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, which is before Mamre, the field that Abraham purchased with the sons of Heth, and there Abraham was buried and Sarah his wife. And it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt by the well of Lahairoi, and these are the generations of Ishmael. And so it hops into Ishmael, tells us all about Ishmael's lineage and where they all went, and so you can read all that. It's just giving some background, because again, children of Israel, just coming out of Egypt, they're about to meet some of these people. Hundreds of years later, these people have made little nations for themselves, and so when they come in and they go, hey, Moab, why is there Moabites? And he goes, remember the story of Lot? Oh, them. Yep. Oh, remember Ammon? Oh, okay, yep. Lot's descendants, remember that backstory? Oh. And it's not saying that you necessarily will take on the character traits of your conception, so to speak. But in some cases, some of these nations kind of do. There's some things that go on that you look at and you're like, you guys kind of keep living the same way your great-great-grandfather lived. And God will talk about that. He'll say, I will visit the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation. That's not saying he's punishing the children for the sin of their father. Quite clearly he's not. But what he's saying is, the way you live can have consequences on your kids and grandkids and great-grandkids and great-great-grandkids. Like, it carries down. Now, what's almost weird about what I just said, though, is that should be a comfort. Because the other half of that is he keeps his kindness to 1,000 generations for those that love him. So what God is saying is he says, hey, you love me? I'll take care of things. And his care lasts a lot longer than his punishment. His care, he's like 1,000 generations. And then for punishing those who did wrong, he's like, 3 or 4 generations. And that contrast is meant to show us that there is repentance. There is a way to turn things around. But we do have to be careful with how we live. One of the things that was observed in this commentary I was reading is you don't read anything about Moses' kids after a certain point. Moses had kids. You never see them mentioned. You see Aaron's kids. You see Moses' father-in-law. You see mention of Moses' wife. But what happened to his kids? And it just brought up the fact that a lot of well-known people, a lot of very prosperous people, in the process of living how they live, they lose their kids. So some commentators wonder if Moses' kids basically just kind of went their own way and did their own thing. We don't know. It's completely silent. Like there's just no, it's like they vanished from existence. And you're like, where are Moses' kids? I mean, Aaron's mentioned here and Aaron's kids and all. What happened? I don't know. But we can tell, I mean, you look at Abraham and you look at Abraham's kids and grandkids and how some of them turned out. Again, how you live is not a promise of how your kids will turn out. It's just not. And even Job, I mean, Job spent so much time praying for his kids that he said, on the off chance that they've sinned and done something wrong, I want to make sure I'm praying for them. And that's where, again, we have to trust the Lord. We have to leave some things in God's hands. And I know it's painful when you look at, I mean, I just know from students of mine that have gone astray and how much it grieved my heart. I can only imagine the other side. But we just got to look at that and say, you've got multiple kids. Sometimes they take on the character traits of their parents and grandparents. But we pray. We pray that they live faithful lives. And so that's what you see here in 12 through 18. But then I want to zoom in on 19. And it says this, now these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son, in case you forgot who Isaac was. It says, Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife. She was the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Padan Aram, the sister to Laban the Syrian. Keep that name in mind. We're going to come back to him in just a little bit. And Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And so you see a repeat on this theme. And we've talked about it in the morning service, but how many times do these trials come in multiple waves? A lot of times. I mean, I've talked to a few of you about all the events of this week, but I mean, I spent Tuesday watching a video about someone who got murdered. And I was kind of studying out that topic, and I'm looking at that. And then Wednesday happened, and a very prominent man got assassinated for pretty much no reason. And you look at that and you go, okay, so I'm already kind of not in the right complete mindset because I'm trying to figure out this topic, and that thing happens, and then Thursday's 9/11, which, those of us who lived through that, we're kind of like, oh, that's a great memory. And so it's like this 1, 2, 3 punch that if you weren't ready for it, you're kind of like, what is going on? Like, there's a lot of stuff going on all at the same time. And then, of course, if you go to other news, you're like, there's a lot going on here. What do I do? And that's where God is trying to get us to say, who are you staring at? Who are you focusing on? We covered it on Wednesday night, which, like I said, it was oddly appropriate that we had planned that lesson out from, 20 weeks earlier, and it just all fell all at the same time. But there's something about, hey, these trials hit, these struggles hit, and what is the first thing you need to do? You pause, and you start praying. And look what Isaac does. Isaac's dad was hit with the same exact trial. His wife is barren. He goes through all the trouble of finding a wife and all the struggle that goes along with that. And he gets his wife, and then they're like, we're going to have kids. And it's like, nope, no, you're not. And that's a struggle, that's a pain. Like I don't mean like, oh, that's a pain. No, I mean like that's a painful experience to go through. And look what he does. He actually does the right thing. It says, and Isaac was 40 years old, and he says what? He entreated the Lord for his wife. He goes straight to the Lord and says, hey, I've learned something from Dad. I've learned something. Because Dad walked with God for 30 years before he finally had a kid. I really don't want to wait 30 years. I don't want to be that 70-year-old guy with a newborn. 40 years, I think about my age having a newborn, and I'm like, ugh. 3-year-old's energetic enough. You guys are like, we love your kids. They're so energetic. I'm like, I'm a zombie sometimes. I got 4 bundles of energy that are like, it's like trying to keep a thing of explosives under wraps. Can you imagine? Newborn at 40. And Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord was entreated of him. And what? And Rebekah, his wife, conceived. And so we look at this idea that these trials, they keep repeating themselves. They just keep coming in waves. They just keep hitting, and you're like, how do I handle this? And you come and you say, I'm going to pause, and I'm just going to come to the Lord in prayer, and I'm going to say, Lord, you've got to take care of this one. Because quite literally, there's nothing he can do. Now, I want you to put a pin in this. I realize I'm setting a lot of little seeds, but this is what the story is doing. I want you to put a pin in this because you notice the next generation is also going to run into the fact of wives that can't have kids. So it just keeps happening. It's like God saying, if this lineage is going to continue, it's going to continue because I said it continues. There's a process going on here. But I want you to notice that they try everything. I mean, they go and get the mandrakes, and they do all the different things that are supposed to help with conception, and they're trying all the different tricks, and God's just like. But I love what Isaac does. Isaac, he doesn't have an answer. He doesn't know what to do. And so what does he do? Just runs to the Lord and says, Lord, I'm just going to pray. And he prays, and the Lord listens. Now, did the Lord listen to Abraham right away? I mean, he did. He just didn't do anything about it right away. He made him wait 20 years. And that's something that we're going to get to in the morning service, because in the morning service, Jesus goes through trial, and then Jesus is walking to someone's house, and there's a 12-year-old girl who's about to die, and there's a woman who's been struggling with something for 12 years. And it's very fascinating that the text we're about to look at in the morning service brings out the year 12, because here's a 12-year-old girl that God let grow up to the age of 12 before she died, and here's a woman who struggled physically for 12 years before God healed her. And it was just the weirdest little coincidence, if you will, that God says, I'm going to deal with this little girl by letting her grow up, then I'm going to take her. And I'm going to deal with this woman by making her not get a cure for 12 years so that I can heal her in person. Like, I'm going to come and physically heal her in person. And it's one of those things that you look at and you're like, why does God do it that way? Like, why does God, why does God make that decision that he made? And we have to come back to say, he's God. We don't understand. We just, like why is he putting Isaac through this if he's just going to cure it like that? Why is he doing that? And it's to remind him that the problems are going to keep happening. So serving God does not automatically protect you from all problems. I think we all agree on that one. Health and wealth gospel aside. You think about it. There's guys who preach that are like, you serve God and you'll never get sick and you'll never be poor and and it's like, sure. Hope that works for you. No, God's saying there will still be struggles. There will still be trials. There will still be things that happen that you do not understand. But what I put before you is an example that in the case of Abraham, he had enough promises to keep going. He just knew. He lingered 30 years in that doubt and that uncertainty and that frustration that no doubt came. And every time he tried to deal with it in his own, God said, that's not how I want you to handle it. I want you to just trust me. And then Isaac comes along and he goes, all right, I'm just going to go straight to God on this one. Boom. And God just removes it immediately. And you're like, God, why? I don't know. He's God. And in some cases, he's going to make you sit there for 30 years and say, this is the process. And other times, he's going to go, I'm going to cure it right away. And then if you look at the next generation, they're just an absolute mess. But we'll talk about that in a few weeks. And look what happened. And Isaac was entreated the Lord for his wife, and she was barren, and the Lord was entreated. And Rebekah, his wife, conceived, and the children struggled together within her. And she said, if it be so, why am I thus? Like, if God's done this, like, why is this happening like this? Like, I've got these twins inside, and they're already wrestling. Like, what on earth? Like, there is not enough room in there for you two to be wrestling and fighting. You need to knock it off. And that's how she feels pregnant. She's like, this is ridiculous, and it needs to stop. You should ask Deb about her experience being a twin. Quite literally, they didn't know she had twins in there because they had the same heartbeat, they were surprised when they were giving birth and they were twins. But there was absolutely no surprise here. All right? This was one of those things that was like, And when you feel that kick, it's because he just kicked him in the face. All right? And that's what's going on. But look what the Lord says. He says, there are 2 nations in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. The one people shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. And this is going to become really important because in the case of Isaac, Isaac was the eldest son of the head wife, if you will. So you could make the case that Isaac was the eldest, even though Ishmael was born first, and that Isaac was the son of Sarah, and so therefore all those concubine rules and other things came into play. Remember, this is hundreds of years before the giving of the law. We're still learning more and more about God. So that's why this is the case. But in this case, God is going to say, the birthright, they go to who I choose. And I want you to know also, when I choose, it's not because they're necessarily good people. Those are 2 really important facts coming out of this text. He says, I am going to choose who the birthright goes to. And it's definitely not because Jacob's a good guy. Because you're going to look, when your name quite literally means heel grabber, which is the implication of deceiver and trickster, we're not lifting you up as a moral paragon of goodness. And that's what God is doing. God is saying, I'm in charge. I have a plan. I have a system in place. It's not going to make sense. All right? I'll use this illustration to kind of close out this part of our study. I went to the Jelly Belly factory this week. How many of you guys have been to the Jelly Belly? Okay, it's delicious. It's wonderful. All right. Boy, it is something else, huh? I mean, you wander that tour, and you're kind of looking down on it going, sure. I mean, they have videos explaining what all the different parts of the process are doing. But you walk through the Jelly Belly factory, from that little lofty view where you're looking down on everything. And it's confusing enough from the overhead view. I can only imagine if you didn't know what you were doing and you just kind of wandered onto the factory floor, you'd be like, there's candy falling out of the ceiling over there, and there's a conveyor belt over here with really ugly looking balls of goo. I don't know what that's all about. And the funny thing is, you kind of come in at the end of the process, and then kind of work your way back to the beginning of the process, and you're like, I don't know what's going on. But it's all this step-by-step process that someone has all planned out. And Jelly Belly takes 14 days to actually make. I'm like, that's insane. No wonder they charge so much for them. But you've got that whole process laid out. But it starts out with like, hey, we need this cornstarch mold thing, and then we need all that little gooey stuff poured in, and then we need the shell, and there's all these steps in between that you're looking at going, I don't get it. I don't understand what's going on. But I really like the end product. The end product is really, really good, unless it's one of those the bamboozle ones. Those are monstrosities. But that process, I want you to think, that's kind of what it's like living in this earth. We're kind of stuck in the middle of the factory line going, I don't know what's going on. I literally, like you're literally lost on the factory floor going, okay, I know my job is to pull this lever, but I know, like, what is going on over there? There's like a big robot, like picking stuff up and just like moving it around. And there's this guy wandering around with a broom. What's going on? Like, I know my job is just to pull the lever, but I really, really want to know what else is going on here. And God's like, I'm not going to tell you what else is going on here. Just pull the lever. And that's what happens because, I mean, you think about Isaac. Isaac is kind of in this weird state of he's like, I had to wait 40 years to find a wife. And then once I found a wife, she couldn't have kids. And then once she had kids, they're like duking it out in her womb. And then God says, and just random, I'm going to choose the younger to be the one that's in charge. What? I'm sorry, that's chaos. But God's like, no, it makes sense to me. And I'm the only one that really it matters that it makes sense to because I'm the one overseeing the whole department. And so I want us to kind of understand that. And that's, again, that has no shortage of application just to our own daily life as we work our way through just so many confusing things. We understand God's in charge. We understand He chooses things at His own counsel. But He's not necessarily choosing people because they're good people. Like he's not choosing Jacob because Jacob was just a stellar guy. He said, no, like I'm just going to choose him and I'm going to make a point and I'm going to teach you something about myself in this. And so that's where it's beautiful to kind of sit back sometimes and say, okay, in this struggle, what can I learn about God that I didn't already know? And that's where you'll notice throughout these narratives, there's going to be all these Jewish names that we don't understand because we don't speak the Hebrew. And there'll be new names for God that are taught every step of the way. So Hagar's like, hey, El Roi, you're the God who sees me. Oh, Jehovah Jireh, you're the God who provides. And there's just lists of all these names, and I'll give it to you probably next week. But there's just lists of names, and you can see that they pop up as people have to face a struggle, and now they have to learn a new name. Because, oh, God did that. Ah, you're the one who sees me. Ah, cool. Okay. I didn't know that before. And so that's kind of the, I guess, devotional challenge as we study the minutia of the text. Learn a new name of God this week. You know, experience God. I mean, God who clears my confusion up. The God who helped me find my car keys. You know, whatever. But the God who provides. It's those things. Elohim is a great one. I mean, he's this ruler who, you know. So anyway, we'll leave it at that. There's much more we could say, but let's pause there and take some questions, and then we'll get into the morning service here in just a little bit. Mike?
Given the twin struggle and the firstborn and that wrapping a ribbon around the ribs or something to make which was good, and the history of Esau giving up for pottage, porridge, whatever it was, why do you think they still had to trick Isaac in the end with the whole fuzzy arm thing?
I think, this is me just guessing. Think about David with Saul. David was prophesied to be the next guy in line, and his soldiers are gathered around him. He's there, Saul's sitting in his tent, and they say, just strike him through the heart with a spear right now, and you can take over the kingdom. And basically they were pushing David to kind of short circuit the process, and let's just get straight to the ruling, and let's not leave anything to chance. And David said, no, I'm going to do this God's way. And I think David is a successful prophecy in that he said, I'm going to let God fulfill every step along the way. I think when it came to Rebekah and Isaac and some of this, I almost think Isaac may have still tried to give the blessing to Enoch. And his wife wasn't going to have any of it, and she was going to take matters into her own hands. And I think Jacob, I don't know how much he knew God. I don't know how much he had experienced God. And so he's like, hey, prophecy about me? I'm going to make sure it happens. And it's a really good contrast because here's a guy who takes the prophecy into his own hands And it does come to life, but he lives a miserable life because of it. And then David says, I'm going to leave all these steps to God and let God handle it. And he's actually blessed as a result of it. So we'll get into a few more of the details. I think the other thing to remember is I don't know how much these people knew of what was said about them. So the twins might not have known that story.
So we've kind of got 20/20 hindsight.
Yeah. So we're definitely reading with 20/20 hindsight. So Moses is writing this hundreds of years later, telling the story in full detail. I don't know how much they knew on the ground, other than what God specifically told them. But even if they did know, I think there's still that temptation to say, I'm going to take matters into my own hands and just make sure it happens. Like Abraham with Hagar and a few other times. But yeah, that's an excellent question that we're going to get into here in about a week or two.
One of the strangest stories
It
in
is.
the whole Bible.
It is unbelievably, like, I've been at a birth. I don't know that I've ever seen like a hand come bursting out and they're like, wrap it. And then the hand goes back in and then another baby somehow sneaks by and you're like, that happened. Sure. I mean, maybe it was a C-section. I could see that. But anyway, there's a lot of weird stuff that happens. And yeah, so any other questions? All right, Martha. I don't know. There's a lot that you can read into everything. I try not to read too deeply into most of the metaphors because otherwise you get a little bit too symbolic of everything represents every, It might. I mean, the Bible is extremely deep. You can almost drown in it. I'm not sure. So, all right. Well, so we're back in Genesis, just in case you didn't realize. Lord willing, we're going to move a lot faster through this section because this section has a lot more of like, it's the same guy for like a whole chapter, and we can just recount his whole story really fast. So Lord willing, we won't take a year on this half of Genesis. Don't hold your breath. All right, let's pray. Neil, could I get you to close this in prayer, please?